Everyone again, and welcome back to another reading of Star Wars Republic Commando, Hard Contact by Karen Travvis. We'll begin on Chapter 3, and without further ado, let us continue.
Classified, highest. Encryption only. You're the best in your field. The best soldiers, tacticians, sappers, communicators, survival experts. I picked you personally because I want to train the best commandos in the galaxy. You'll have everything you'll need, whatever you want, except one thing: home. This is a top secret project. You'll not tell anyone where you're going, and you'll not leave Commando. Ever. As far as your friends and family are concerned, you're already dead.
Jango Fett, recruiting his hand-picked commando instructors, the Ku-Vuldar in the Mandalorian tongue, those who no longer exist. The Nemodians had a taste for elaborate and wholly inappropriate grandeur, and Gez Hokin despised them for it. Lick and Keith's huge villa was set on top of a hill overlooking the Kushian plantation, a foolish choice given the prevailing winds, but it seemed to satisfy the Nemodian's need to show he was boss. The location might have made sense from a military perspective, but Ankit was a bean-counting coward like all of his kind. He didn't need defensibility either. No, the Nemodian was a Dekut, a complete and utter Dekut. Hokin ran up the hedge-flanked steps of the veranda spanning the entire front of the building, headdress tucked under one arm, his shattergun, knives, rope spike, provocatively visible in his belt. He wasn't rushing to see his paymaster, oh no. He was in a hurry to get the meeting over with. He ignored the servants and minions that swept in Keith's spacious office, with its panoramic view of the countryside. Kilora's commercial overlord was watering pots of flowers on the windowsill. He paused to flick one with his fingertip, and it sprayed a powerful, sickly scent in the air. He inhaled with parted lips. "I do wish you would knock, Hokin," and Keith said without turning around. "It's really most discourteous." "You summoned me," Hokin said flatly. "Merely checking on your progress of your conversation with the Jedi. Had there been any, I would have called you. You haven't killed him, have you? Do tell me you haven't. I need to know if his activities will affect the market prices. I'm not an amateur, but one has to do the best with one's staff has, yes? I do my own dirty work, thanks. No, he isn't talking. He's rather resistant for a Jedi." If Ankit had a nose, he would have been looking down it at Hokin. Hokin controlled an impulsive urge to cut this glorified shopkeeper, this grocer, down to size. For all of his height, the Nemodian was soft and weak, his only strength contained within his bank account. He blinked with passionless liquid red eyes. Hokin almost, reached for his rope spike. "Jedi do not visit wars like this to take the therapeutic waters, Hokin. Have you confirmed that he has an associate? He's a Jedi Master. He was seen with the Padawan. Not a very discreet Jedi Master, it seems." Fuller could have been good at calculating odds, or he had never started on Gur-O in the tavern. But at least he was prepared to stand up for himself. Despite all that soft, mystical nonsense he spouted, Hokin admired guts, even if he rarely tolerated them. They were always in short supply. "We'll find the Padawan, and we'll find out what intelligence Fuller has, if any. Make sure you do. I have a lucrative contract resting on this." Hokin had become practiced at controlling his urge to lash out, but he saw no reason to subject his mouth to the same discipline. "If I succeed, it will be because I take pride in my work. You'll need the credits. For the time being, but one day, Ankit, I won't need to work for you at all. And Keith gathered his robes a little closer and drew himself up to his full height, which had no effect at Hokin at all. You must learn to accept your reduced station in the galactic order, Hokin, and Keith said. There is no longer a hierarchy of brute force in which your warrior ancestors thrived. Today, we need to be soldiers of intellect and commerce, and no amount of strutting around in that museum piece uniform will revive your glorious past. Alas, even the great Jango Fett succumbed to the Jedi in the end. News traveled fast. Fett was a source of pride among the remaining handful of Mandalorians in diaspora. Even if he fought for money, he was the best, and Kit must have known how perfectly well much that comment would have stung. Hokin was determined that the Nemodian would see no evidence on his face to prove it. He certainly tried to keep that out of mind when he was interrogating Fullier, much as he wanted to blame the Jedi for the humiliation of a cultural hero. He had to be clear why he was smashing the Jedi's bones. Revenge was unprofessional. He took a careful breath. Do you keep Dans as pets, Ankit? I hear some off-worlders do try. Dans? No, filthy little creatures. Most savage. But if you did keep one, and you didn't feed it well, would you be surprised if it bit you? Well, I suppose not. Then feed me well. Hokin turned and walked out without being dismissed, deliberately unbidden, and deliberately fast so Enki couldn't have the last word. He replaced his helmet and ran down the steps of the ludicrously extravagant villa. He didn't care if Enki rented the whole planet out to the separatist scientists. They weren't honorable enough to fight with real weapons, either. They got bugs to do their work for them. It was a disgrace. It was unnatural. Hokin felt his blood-red jacket for the Jedi's weapon. It didn't look like much at all, and it was surprisingly easy to activate, even though he suspected that fully mastering it might be another matter. A humming blue shaft of light, vivid as day, shot out from the hilt. Hokin swept it scythe-style along a neatly tripped Tarmul hedge, cutting its height in half. The lightsaber wasn't bad for a soft Jedi weapon. Hokin suspected the lightsaber looked at odds with his traditional Mandalorian helmet and its distinctive T-shaped eye slit. But a warrior had to adapt, and Fullier had questions to answer. Docking Bay, Delta TAC 768. Fleet Support Air Station, Ord Mantell. The Narshada Agri-Utility Crop Sprayer on the pad looked as if it was only rust holding it together. It was, to use Jusik's uncharacteristically colorful description, an old clunker. And somehow it was going to take them to Kilora. It wouldn't attract much attention flying over farming country, unless, of course, it broke up in mid-flight. This didn't seem out of the question. Well, they don't build them like that anymore, Fai said. That's because not even the HUD Aviation Authority would certify this Narsh dirt crate airworthy, Niner said, straining to prevent his pack from bending him over backward. He was laden with nearly double the 25-kilo weight he was used to carrying, along with a powerful emergency chute. Niner had never actually come across the HAA, but he absorbed every scrap of intel, read, seen, or heard in his life. Anyway, all it has to do is get us down there. It's making a noble sacrifice, Jusik said, suddenly right behind them. He smiled and murmured dirt crate to himself, as if it amused him. Niner wondered for a moment if he'd broken protocol by using the phrase. Are you certain you can do this? I could ask Master Zay if he would allow me to accompany you. Niner wanted to laugh, but you don't laugh at Jedi, especially one who seemed to care about what happened to you. We lost too many officers on Geonosis, sir. They can't grow you to order. The Padawan lowered his eyes for a second. It's considerate of you to think of me as an officer, Sergeant. You are Commander now, sir. We won't let you down. There's nobody better prepared for this than us. This is your first special operation, is it? Yes, sir. Doesn't that worry you? No, sir, not at all. The 6 P's, sir. Proper planning prevents inadequate performance, sir. Jusek appeared to be counting and then raised his eyebrows. This is real, Sergeant. Oh, for all their skills and wisdom, there were still things even the Jedi didn't know. Niner hesitated to lecture Jusek. Real. Oh, yes. Niner knew what real was, all right. Padawan Barden Jusek had hardly ever seen the killing house on Commando. He never stormed the building with its twisting corridors and innumerable flights of stairs. He didn't know how many commandos died in training when the rounds were live and the terrorist, or whoever this directing staff were being that day, aimed to kill, and frequently did. He also had no idea what it was like spending 4 days lying prone in a scrape in the undergrowth on observation. Rifle ready, urinating where you lay because you couldn't move and give away your position. He had no idea how to learn to judge the amount of charge required for rapid entry of a building the hard way, because if you didn't get it right, in a hurry and under fire, it could blow your head clean off. 2-8 had learned that way. Jusek did not know just how far you could go and carry a wounded comrade when you had to. He probably didn't even know how to perform an emergency field tracheometry with a vibroblade and a clean length of fuel line. It wasn't Jusek's fault. He had far bigger issues to worry about. There was no reason for a Jedi commander to be concerned with himself, with the details of a clone commando's life. But Niner thought he probably would, and he admired the Padawan all the more for that. We'll be fine, sir, Niner said. The training is quite realistic. Inside the shabby Narsh vessel, the tanks had been stripped out, and the bulkheads lined with securing straps and stealth sheeting that would render the ship's cargo invisible to any probe or scan. Niner realized that 4 men would be pretty cramped in there with packs and weapons. A couple of Blastech E-Web repeating blasters were already stowed, and at Atton's request, 2 Trandoshans LJ TAC-50 concussion rifles. Atton's livid face was looking less alarming now. But he'd always have a scar. The Bacta spray could fix plenty if you used it soon enough, but it couldn't reverse scarring. He pulled himself through the open hatch with an APC array blaster in one hand and his DC-17 strapped across his chest, just about keeping his balance under the weight of his pack. Darman, acting as loadmaster, gave him a helpful leg up and eyed the blaster. Got a thing for Trandoshan technology? Darman asked. This'll deal with their shields better than our E-Web, Atton replied. And the LJ-50 is a nice backup when we take out the facility, just in case Republic doesn't make all the best gear. Niner wondered if Atton ever talked about anything else but gear. His squad must have been a miserable bunch, and with a miserable instructor. Clones might have looked utterly standardized to outsiders, but every squad was altered slightly by the cumulative effects of their experiences, including the influences of the individual trainers. Every commando battalion had its own non-clone instructor, and seemed to take on some of his or her unique characteristics and vocabulary. We learn, Niner thought. We learn fast, and unfortunately we learn everything, like Dirt Crate. Every squad developed its own dynamics as well. It was a part of their hardwired human biology. Put 4 men in a group, and soon you'll be having a pecking order defined by its roles and foibles that acquired them. Niner knew this, and he thought he knew Fies, and he was pretty sure he knew where Darman was heading, but Atton wasn't sliding into place just yet. Fi had a Geonosian force pike. He hefted it and smiled. Where'd you get that? Atten asked, suddenly interested. Souvenir of Geonosis, Travvis said, and winked. Seemed ashamed to waste it. He flipped it over in his hand and twirled it, arm outstretched, missing Atten by a calculated handspan. He didn't react. You wouldn't need to use the power setting, would you? This thing's heavy. He brought it down in a slicing movement. Wallop. That'll make their eyes water. I don't need any more souvenirs of Geonosis, Atten said. His tone was distinctly frosty. Indelibly etched, you might say. Hey, Niner cut in. Chat later, he said. Shift it, people. Niner already knew he would have his work cut out with Atten and wondered if anything would trigger his natural urge to be one of the squad. He also wondered about his apparent negativity. He'll shake down, sooner or later. He'll have to. Backing up to a convenient ledge on the port bulkhead, Niner unclipped his backpack. 45 kilos lighter, he eased between Phi and Atten and peered into the cockpit. An R5 droid was at the controls. The unit was still fueling up the vessel from a droid Bowser, burbling and whistling to itself. Niner leaned across to plug his datapad into the console to confirm the flight plan and synchronize it with the vessel's actual path. The R5 didn't take any notice. It would fly the routine it was given. Improvising, thinking on his feet, making the most of resources at hand, were all part of operating as a commando. But so was acquiring adequate intelligence. What they had wasn't enough to plan a mission, and that meant they would either have to acquire it in the field or fail. Niner didn't want to fail Padawan Jusik. He ejected his datapad and edged back into the hatch, trying not to clip Phi or Atten. Calm silence from the time we take off, Jusik said, leaning through the open hatch. The assault ship, the Majestic, is diverting to Kulora and will remain on station a parsec from the planet until she receives your request for extraction. Then gunships will be transmitted to your location within the hour. Niner almost asked just how long the Majestic might wait, but he feared it would look as if he was doubting his squad's competence. He knew the answer. The ship would wait until Uthon was taken. Even if that was several commando missions down the line, it wasn't waiting for them. We won't keep the Majestic waiting, Niner said. Anything else you need? Niner shook his head. No, Commander. Darman stood up to one side of the ramp, like an honor guard waiting for the Jedi to leave. Very well, Jusik said, looking hesitant, as if he wanted to walk away but thought better of it. I hope to debrief you on your return. Niner took that literally, although Jusik was looking at him as if he meant something else. It made sense for a Padawan commander to process whatever intel they might gain. Jusik turned and walked away, and Darman jumped inside. The hatch closed with a slight shudder, sending fine fragments of rusting metal to the deck. It only has to land, Niner thought. He switched to the hollow projection in his datapad and studied the three-dimensional flight path over fields, lakes, and forests. It was part of real image, part simulation, projected onto an existing chart. They were looking at an area 30 clicks north of a small town called Imbrani. The single-story building with shabby sheet metal roofing, ringed in an incongruously well-cut expanse of grass, nestled in the plantation of Kuvara trees. Some of the image was blurred, but it was the best resolution that a surveillance remote could manage at the distance above the planet. Specks, people, wandered around an encircling path. It's the capture live bit that complicates matters, Darman said, gazing at the image over Niner's shoulders. Or else we could just bomb it, like, back into hut space. That's why they created us, Niner said. For the complicated jobs. He closed his eyes for a few moments to visualize the insertion. He saw it from takeoff to landing, smooth and unplanned, every detail, or as many as their incomplete intel could furnish. and his own experience of 100 exercises could confirm. In this detached state, something occurred to him. He pictured Jusik's face and his awkward, nervous shrugs. He realized what a Padawan had meant when he said he was hoping to debrief them personally on their return. He meant good luck. He wanted them to survive. Niner, who had known for as long as he could remember that he was a soldier bred to die, found that intriguing. Dans were about 30 centimeters long, fully grown, and it took a whole pack of them to bring down a Merle calf. But at night, when they were emerged from their warrens and hunted, the farmers locked their doors and stayed clear of the fields. It wasn't so much their teeth that the local farmers feared, it was the deadly bacteria that the animals carried. A minor scratch or a bite was almost always fatal, and Master Foulier had used his entire supply of Bacta spray in administering first aid to the villagers. So Atane was as housebound at night as any of our other hosts. She could hear the little predators outside squabbling and scrabbling. She sat cross-legged on the mattress and chewed on the thin breads, almost hungry enough to gulp down the stew, but not that hungry. A few bacteria are good for your immune system, she thought. You've probably eaten worse without knowing. But she knew this time. Leaving the bowl where it stood, she rolled over the hollow chart sphere and over in her palms, running through all the possibilities for getting information to the Jedi Council. Stow away in a transport? Possible. Transmit the data from ground? No. The transmissions were tightly controlled by the Nemodians. Any other traffic from Kyolura to Coruscant would draw attention. There was always the possibility of finding the right droid carrier, but that was a long shot, and it might take so much time as to be useless. Perhaps she'd have to do the job herself. Lightsabers were superb weapons, but right now she needed an army. The realization that she had beaten the odds to obtain valuable information, but was now unable to get it to those who needed it, almost crushed her. I'm not done yet, she said aloud, but she feared that she was, at least for the night. Her eyelids felt heavy, and she braced her elbows on her knees, letting her head rest in her hands. A good night's sleep, she might have a better idea in the morning. Her eyes closed, images of Coruscant, her clan passing a ball by thought alone, a nice hot bath, food she trusted to be clean. Then suddenly, every fiber in her body leaped at once, heart pounding. Atane thought at first she had had one of those half dreams of falling that sometimes came when she was dozing off. But no, she was fully awake and knew she hadn't. Something had changed. Something in the Force had been altered, and forever. She jumped to her feet, suddenly clear what it was. She needed no training or education to understand it. Every instinct coded in her genes cried out. Something, someone, was gone from the Force. Master, she said. She had suspected he was dead. Now she knew he was, and she knew it happened right then. It was impossible not to wonder how and where, but she knew enough about the Nemodians' hired muscle and their techniques to guess. Ignoring the ever-present Dans, she went out the barn door and to swing it open. It was an act of helplessness. There was nothing she could do, now or ever. Something rustled in the grass. It was a solitary something, and it sounded longer or larger than a Dan. She noticed for the first time that the constant snuffling and squabbling of the Dan packs had stopped. They had gone. Atane felt her lightsaber, just in case. Loud squawking and a flurry of wings made her start. A disturbed flock of leatherbacks rose in the air and scattered into the darkness, trailing sparks of light from their scales. Through the Force, she detected only small creatures with simple desires, and a male Merle wandering along the fence armed with such ferocious tusks that not even Dans would risk approaching. She looked up at the night sky. It appeared unchanging, constant, but she knew it was never was. They're coming, she thought. She heard the old woman's voice, putting it down in grief. Putting down to grief and lack of sleep. Attain stumbled back inside the barred door. It was just another crop sprayer hired to dress the fields over the bark harvest, laden with bug killers and soil enhancers, and piloted by a droid. At least, that was what the Narsh crates transporter had told the Kilaro traffic controller. And judging by the absence of a missile up the tailpipe, he had believed it. Darman was still exploring the enhancements to his helmet and suit. I used to think I wore this armor, he said. Now I think it's wearing me. Yeah, they spent some credits upgrading this since our last time, Fi said. Wow, walking weapon systems, eh? 200 clicks, Atten said, without looking up from his datapad. He propped his helmet beside him with the tactical beam pointed up to provide some light in the closed bay. Darman couldn't hear him over the noise of the vessel's atmosphere engines, but he could easily lip-read enough. Let's hope this works. It was helmets on at 100 clicks. The squad prepared both for a controlled landing and an early bailout and a free fall if they were picked up by the Separatist ground units. Darman hoped their luck would hold. They were landing heavy and more gear than they ever used in training. They'd have to hit the drop zone accurately to avoid impossible trek across the country. Accurate, if they had to jump for it, meant high altitude, low opening procedure. They could drift for 50 clicks if they opted for the safer, slower, high opening technique. Darman didn't relish in being defenseless in the air for that long. Niner was studying his datapad, balancing on his right thigh. A three-dimensional shimmering hollow of their flight path played on a handspan above it. He glanced up to Darman and gave him a silent thumbs up. On course and on target, Darman returned the gesture. There was an art to loading up for a mission when carrying the firepower of a small army among 4 men. Darman had loaded his backpack to capacity. The rest of the weapons and ordnance was in the shock-proof container and stood knee-high. The bowcaster, he loved that weapon, was strapped across his chest with jury-rig webbing. To leave his hands free for the DC-17, he had an assortment of detonators kept safe separately from the charges and other ordnance in the lower section. He was now so heavy, even with the extra weight, that he had to bounce to get up right from the sitting position. He rehearsed standing a few times. It was tough. Fortunately, the squad would be inserted close to the target. He didn't have to haul it far. 100 clicks, Atten said. He switched off his spot lamp. Helmets. The compartment was suddenly dark, and there was a collective hiss of helmet seals purging and re-engaging. They could only talk to each other at very short range now. On Kilora, anything more than 10 meters risked detection. The only visible light was a faint blue glow from the heads-up display in their visors. A group of ghostly, disembodied T-shapes in the gloom, and the shimmering landscape playing out in Niner's datapad. His head was tilted down slightly, watching the actual position of the utility vessel in the simulated landscape. The sprayer started to lose weight, or height, exactly on course. In a matter of minutes, they would be... Bang. A shudder ran through the airframe, and there was no engine noise at all. For a second, Darman thought they had been hit by anti-aircraft fire. Niner was on his feet instantly, moving forward to the cockpit, accidentally whacking Atten with his pack as he turned. Darman, without conscious decision, grabbed the emergency hatch handle and prepared to activate it with a bailout. Darman could see the droid clicking and flashing, apparently engaged in a dialogue of some kind with the vessel. The ship wasn't listening. "Double A, Sarge?" "Bird strike," Niner said, deceptively quiet. "Atmos engines fried. Can the R5 glide this thing down?" "It's trying." The deck tilted and Darman grabbed at the bulkhead to stay upright. "No, that isn't gliding. That's crashing." "Bang out," Nina said. "Bang out now." The Narsh dirt crate hadn't let them down. It was just succumbed to being in the wrong airspace at the wrong time and met the local avian species the hard way. Now they were plummeting toward the kind of landing not even the latest Katarn armor could help them survive. Darman blew the hatch, and in a rush of air sent dirt and debris whirling through the cargo bay. The door fell away through the opening. It was pitch black outside, a challenge for a free-faller even with night vision. Darman was starting to experience serious doubt for a second in his life. He would wonder if he was becoming one of those despised creatures that his training sergeant had called cowards. "Go, go, go," Niner shouted. Phi, Nat, eased through the hatch and stepped out. "Don't try to jump, just let yourself fall." Darman stood back to make way for Niner. He wanted to salvage as much gear as he could. They needed the repeating blasters. He grabbed some of the dismantled sections. "Now," Niner said. "You first." "We need the gear," Darman thrust 2 sections at him. "Take these, Al." "I said jump." Darman wasn't a rash man. None of them were. They took calculated risks, though, and he was calculated that Niner wouldn't leave him. His sergeant was standing at the open hatch, arm held out imperiously. A clear sign to get on with it and jump. No. Darman had made up his mind. He lunged forward and shoulder-charged Niner out of the hatch, grabbing the doorframe just in time to stop plunging after him. It was clear from the stream of expletives that Niner was not expecting this, nor was he happy. The extra pack jerked out after him on its tether. Darman heard one last profanity, then Niner was out of range. Darman grabbed a strap and peered down. He couldn't see his sergeant falling, and that probably meant nobody else could either. He had now a minute, or less, to salvage what he could, and get out of there before the utility hit the ground. He switched on his helmet lamp. He couldn't afford the time to listen to the rushing wind and complete absence of reassuring engine noise, but he heard it anyway. He dropped the bowcaster and began lashing the blaster sections together with a line. It was a shame. He loved the bowcaster, and they needed to make those cannons more. Knotting lines was hard enough with gloves on, but it was even harder when you were seconds from crashing. Darman fumbled a knot. He cursed. He looped the line again, and this time it held. He let out a sob of relief, dropped the weapon, and dragged the gear down toward the hatch. Nobody could hear him at this range, and he didn't care what the droid thought. Then he stepped out into the black void. The wind took him. There was no rushing landscape beneath him yet to take his attention from the heads-up display. He was free-falling for nearly 200 kilometers an hour, trailing sections of heavy, heavy cannon. He maneuvered into tracking position, packed square across his back, rifle tight to his side, and the remainder of his gear on the container that rested on the backs of his legs. When he deployed the canopy at 800 meters, he would release the container, and he'd use the power descent option, because that might save him from an unsupported, potentially lethal weight of a cannon that was falling with him. Yes, he knew exactly what he was doing, and yes, he was scared. He never jumped with so much unsecured load in training. The cannon be deployed, and it felt like he was slammed into a wall. The power pack kicked in, heating up the air around him. He could now steer. He counted down 15 seconds. Something flared into brilliant white flame beneath him, off to his right. The Narsh vessel crashed some 30 clicks short from the target zone. Darman realized he thought nothing of leaving the R5 on board the stricken utility. It was expendable, and that was how he was seen, he supposed. It was surprisingly easy to think that way. He could see the ground now. His night vision could pick up tops of trees right beneath. No. He tried to miss. He failed. He hit something very, very hard in the air. Then he hit the ground and didn't feel anything at all.